Now it is time to discuss the day's top stories. Joining me live are Liberal Senator Eric Abetz and Labor MP Alicia Payne. Great to see you both. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. I want to begin with the issue of national security and the language around China this week. Senator Abetz, we'll start with you. How do you feel about some of the rhetoric being used by the Prime Minister regarding Labor and China this week?
Well, let's be very clear here that the rhetoric used by the Prime Minister was then adopted by the Leader of the Opposition, and therefore his claim that somehow this was a breach of bipartisanship showed how hollow Mr Albanese is in this area. Look, the issue of national security is fundamentally important to our nation's future, and under the previous Labor government, they cut defence expenditure to the lowest level back to the 1930s. We have restored it, and we are now restoring our military capability. That is a genuine issue for the Australian people to consider come the federal election. Who do you best entrust the national security with? Labor, who is busily cutting away, or the Liberals that are now restoring the funding? In relation to language that is used in the heat of question time, I understand it was withdrawn, and often you say things in question time that you shouldn't do, you withdraw it. But it was a cool, calculated Mr Albanese who used the same terminology later on to try to make a point, which just exposed the hollowness of Mr Albanese pleading bipartisanship. The reason he wants bipartisanship is because he knows that the Labor Party is lagging in this area, and if he can somehow convince the media and public there's no difference between the two, then of course it won't be an election deciding issue. But until Labor step up and denounce the Paul Keatings of this world who deny any problem in relation to China, the Uyghur problem, Hong Kongers, Christians, Falun Gong, all suffering, until Labor is willing to do that, there is a real issue at stake.
All right, Alicia, what's your assessment then on the state of bipartisanship when it does come to China and national security? Are both parties of the same view here?
Well, yes, they are. And in fact, yesterday in Parliament, Anthony Albanese tabled a letter from the Prime Minister thanking him for his bipartisanship on issues of national security, including the AUKUS agreement. This is pure politicking from Scott Morrison and this government, and this is a very desperate government with no agenda in the dying days of this Parliament before an election. And I think it is deeply, deeply concerning that this Prime Minister is willing to play politics with our national security. And I think, it's the head of ASIO very rarely does media, and he's had to come out twice to let people know how concerning this behaviour is, and that this debate is. And it is driven by the Prime Minister. We are bipartisan on this. Another thing that happened this week in Parliament was that Anthony Albanese moved to have a debate, a rational, sensible discussion in the Parliament about these issues, given the Prime Minister seems so concerned about it, and the government shut that down. They didn't want to do that. All they are trying to do is create a scare campaign, and it is incredibly dangerous behaviour, and the Australian people deserve so much better than this.
Alicia, do you believe that Labor is soft on China?
No, I don't. We've been saying that China's relationship with us has changed in recent times, but we're certainly not going to be using national security as a political scare campaign.
Senator Abetz.
The New South Wales Labor Look, the New South Wales Labor Party dominates the federal Labor Party. You've got Bob Carr and Paul Keating, both luminaries within that division, talking about China not being a threat. And when Mr Albanese was specifically asked about Mr Keating's assessment, he said, this is wise counsel. You should always listen to Paul Keating. He did not slap him down as our national interest demanded. And sure, on the AUKUS agreement, the Prime Minister wrote, thanking him for bipartisanship, but that does not mean that Mr Albanese has been bipartisan in every other area of national security. And sure, you can cherry pick one or two items, but I invite the Australian people to have a very close look at the situation with, indeed, the Shadow Home Affairs Minister being unwittingly or deliberately, up to her to tell us, being photographed with a United Front operative in very recent times. Sure, there might be photographs from way back, but this happened in very recent times in her bid for a seat in the House of Representatives. This is just indicative of the fact that they don't have the finger on the pulse, they don't understand the issues, and this is a matter of major concern for us. And look, would I love bipartisanship in this area? Of course I would, but we're not getting it.